organized chain. 30% of IVF cycles were done in the organized chain. 16% clinic, 3% in ownership, 30% in cycles. At present, as we speak, 35 to 40% of India's IVF cycle are part of organized chain, and the rest 60% is still fragmented, unorganized. So starting from 0 to 40, it only took 1 decade.
$60 to 70 new fertility centers per year. No problem getting doctors. Imagine that. That's according to our guest, Vinesh Ghadia, who is the CEO of the IVF vertical in India and the emerging markets for BlackCap Equity. He had been the CEO of ART Fertility Clinics. He had been the COO of Nova, part of the EV network, or a partner of the EV network, and he makes that clarification. Vinesh started in the IVF world in India in the early 90s at the ripe age of 21, at a time when there were only 4 or 5 fertility clinics in the entire country. We talk about the 5 or 6 biggest chains of fertility clinics in India and the 4 or 5 that are coming now. We talk about how more than 1 new fertility clinic a week on average is coming to be in the country. We talk about what the United States can learn in terms of consolidation, because this is a marketplace where roughly a decade or so ago, 0% of market share was under fertility clinic chains, and now 40% is. In India, a network with 35 to 40 clinics is a mid-size chain. Vinesh is looking at buying some of those mid-size chains and consolidating them into a larger group. He talks about that, and then I make him put in demographics, in numbers, and in figures why he believes that India is the biggest market for growth in the assisted reproductive technology space in the next decade. He talks about the scaling opportunities for companies growing into the fertility space in India and their internal rate of return, their expected IRR anyway. He talks about what Indian fertility companies did to solve their fertility doctor shortage, what they're doing and might be doing to solve their embryologist shortage. And we talk a bit about career tracks for young fertility doctors, which I think is probably the biggest difference, at least that I heard in a short conversation between the United States and Canada, and what seems to be happening in India, according to at least this account in a very small conversation. And if we didn't talk about enough, he talked about the falling price of PGTA and why he believes that that is going to make the total percentage of cycles that use PGTA go up from 5 to 6% to about 25% of all cycles that are done. This little bit of coverage that we've done on the assisted reproductive technology space in India is only the tip of the iceberg for covering what's happening in that country. We plan to do a lot more of it, so I hope you enjoy this conversation with Vinesh Ghadia. Mr. Ghadia, Vinesh, welcome to the Inside Reproductive Health podcast.
Thank you very much, Griffin, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure and my privilege to be speaking and talking to you on your podcast. It's a very interesting space for me, and also I think it's becoming an interesting space for millions of couples in India and globally. Thank you for having me here.
I think it's becoming an interesting space for people that work in the fertility field all over the globe. And I said to one of our recent guests, Dr. Ghosh Dasidar, that 5% of our subscriber base comes from India, people that work in the IVF field in India. And previously to that episode, I had never created any content specific to the marketplace in India, and I look forward to covering more this year with Dr. Ghosh Dasidar. We laid the groundwork of the history of IVF in India, how some practices are set up there. You have a lot of experience at the helm of some larger groups, and so I'd like to talk to you about the history of some of the large clinic groups, of the business landscape, and then what you see as some of the unique scaling opportunities and challenges. Let's start with the clinic side. Can you walk us through the history of the large fertility groups in India? Who are they and how did they come to be?
When we talk about fertility groups, it's more about organized chains of IVF clinics in India. But to understand my narration in detail, I would take a little bit historical background on how as a country we have evolved. I have started working in this space in early 90s. This is my 30th year in IVF space. From day one of my professional career at the tender age of 21, I felt in love with this space because it somewhere helps to create more happiness on the earth and in the universe. In early 90s in India, infertility or fertility was considered as personal shortcoming. and it was considered as destiny. It was never accepted as medical treatment or medical disease. And most doctors, I would say 95% of gynecologists who were treating infertility did not have a chapter of infertility in their final year of masters in gynecology. So that was the state, and I come from that background where I have seen this industry growing from ground zero. So very few IVF clinics in early 90s, maybe 4 or 5, and then it started growing towards the end of the decade. Early 2000 is where infertility treatment started becoming a little popular amongst the patients and also amongst the doctor. I have been on pharma side for 16 years, leading and launching large IVF business from the pharmaceutical companies, and I crossed the bridge in 2011. When I came towards the service side, I was one of the founding member of India's first organized IVF chain backed by a private equity company. So it was only in 2010 later, large fertility groups started coming into existence. It was a group of venture capitalists and private equity in healthcare business, and they thought that possibly IVF is complementing to their daycare healthcare model. It was group of venture capitalists and backed by one large private equity. They reached out to one senior doctor in India, Dr. Manish Bankar, and Dr. Bankar and me used to be very good friends because I was from pharma side and he was my key account. He reached out to me. We went and did a presentation to the board about business case and scientific case. And we worked 3 months on the strategy board, on the ground zero business plans, and also on business model. And then started our first step as India's possibly the first ambitious plan for a large fertility chain.
What did you have to prove at that time, Vinesh? What did you, as you're building the business plan, this is something that is pretty new to the venture capitalists and private equity partners, and you're working 3 months on this business plan. What did you really have to focus on to prove in that business plan?
Very interestingly, nobody during that time in India believed that this fragmented doctor-owned IVF clinics, this market can be organized. The biggest challenge was to present the business model to the private equity and the board. And one of the interesting fact which I was driving, and there were not many takers in the boardroom also, is that we will launch a pure play IVF business first time in India, where in the IVF clinic we will not have any neighbor room, no gynec practice, no obstetric practice. Because what investors were thinking is that if and once we grow IVF business, we have ready-made pregnancies from our IVF business, so we will do delivery business also. That's birthing business. Where I was very sure in the model that it has to be pure play, and I had my logic behind it. Second, from where to bring patients in India. So the belief system was that it's word of mouth. And I was very, very sure that because infertility is not talked about, there are myths and taboos, there is stigma around it. Very few people first come forward for treatment, and people who get positive results don't speak about IVF amongst their friends and family. So word of mouth is extremely slow. It takes very long time to develop business on word of mouth. So I had my business plan, which was based on a very new concept of meeting thousands of gynecologists, convincing them to refer patient to us, and the business model. So there were a lot of challenges. There were too many naysayers that this will not work. I think deep in my heart, and along with my medical director, Dr. Manish Bankar, and his partner, Ravi Patel, we were convinced that this will work. It took hard time to convince the board, but the first step was defining, I think, in business model.
You had your reasons for wanting to go the pure play IVF route when other traditionalists may have also wanted to include obstetrics. What were your reasons that you felt strongly this has to be purely fertility treatment?
So, Griffin, it's very interesting if you analyze the full funnel approach. Millions of couples in India suffering from infertility. Majority, I'm talking about 2010, majority believes that they can be treated by astrologers, by quacks, and they would, of course, I am a God-believing person, so they would go to church, mosque, temple. My belief was that if you are a God-believing person suffering from infertility, which is a WHO classified medical disease, you have to find God in a doctor and embryologist and not in the temple, because you will not get result there. Out of that few million couples who would not even come for medical treatment, the large segment of the funnel who accepted and understood largely in urban area that it's a medical issue. Sadly, in India, it is still considered woman's problem. Medically, it's a couple's problem. So out of these millions of couple, many or most of them accepting its medical disease, but woman's problem will go to gynecologist. So 70-80% of infertile patients in India, even today, will first go to gynecologist. Medically right also, because gynec can treat majority of infertility and not everybody requires IVF. So while gynecologists see 10 patients of infertility, 2 or 3 will require IVF, but they will not refer, because the standalone IVF clinics in India are also doing obstetrics and birthing. So basically it was not referring, but it was losing patient to a competitor or your colleague, right? You get my point? So this gynecologist identifying patient requiring IVF were never referring to another IVF specialist, because that patient will never come back to the doctor, because they themselves are competing to the birthing and obstetric business. Now it took very long time for me to convince my board and my investors that the majority of untapped potential in India is lying with gynecologists. So we did a small deep stake study, meeting 500 gynecologists, 500 is small in India, and asking them, do you see infertile patient? Do you see patients who require IVF? If yes, whether you refer or not. 100% doctors said that they get infertile patient. 90% of doctors said they have patients who need IVF. All 90% said we don't refer. And we said why? So when we refer patient, we lose our patient. Second, we don't believe IVF has great results. Third, we believe IVF is expensive. I had presented this study to my management and saying that this is where we can work and we can explore untapped potential, get patient for our need, not from other IVF center, because that's very small, but from the market which is not tapped so far. So we were getting into an untapped potential of the IVF business. It took 6 months, 1 year for me to prove that this is the model which we work. Now, for that business to come in from referral network or from gynecologists referring to IVF specialist, we cannot compete with them. So we cannot have labor room in our clinics. We cannot do birthing.
So you finally are able to prove this concept to the capitalists behind the private equity that are investing, and you and Dr. Manish Bankar ostensibly get your business proposal accepted. Then what happens?
So we started with the first clinic of Dr. Bankar acquiring that clinic, and we had a very ambitious plan of starting a chain of 25 clinics doing 10,000 cycles in a year. When I used to say this to industry experts in India and also across the world, I used to attend global IVF conferences. Most people used to not believe it, that this is possible. Half of them used to laugh, not in front of me, but behind me.
How many cycles was it that you were?
Our plan was to reach 10,000 cycles in a year.
And that was laughable at that time.
Nobody could believe that there was no group doing 1,000 cycles. So when we were presenting our plan, most people thought that it's on paper and cannot be executed, or it's difficult to give life to this plan. So we did our first clinic in Ahmedabad, which was a brownfield acquisition. Then we started creating greenfield clinics, hiring young doctors, hiring young embryologists, a very young business team, which is sales and marketing and the ops team. And we progressed well. In the first 3 years, we really ignited the market growth. There were 5 chains which were large chains which were launched after success of Nova. In 2015, there was an EY report, white paper on IVF potential in India, which was published by Ernst & Young. which shows Nova IVF as the leader in the industry with 9 clinics, doing highest number of IVF cycles and having best-in-class results. I think if you ask me, that was the igniting point in India where more groups started investing, and visualizing the plan. And from practically zero organized business in 2020, in India, we have about 35 to 40% of IVF cycles which are with organized chains. And now there are several chains in India.
You live in Mumbai. Did your original financiers also come from Mumbai? Did they come from other parts of India? Did they come from Spain? Did they come from other parts of the world? Where were the original people that bought into your idea with their dollars come from?
The first seed investment came from an American venture capitalist, GTI Capital, Global Technologies Investment. Second major investment came from again a venture capitalist from US, NEA, New Enterprise Associates. Third came from Middle East, which was Omzest. It was a Middle East-based venture capitalist. The turning point was when we launched our 5th clinic. Dr. Banker also realized that to run one clinic of excellence is a different ball game, but to run a chain is very different in terms of having all the standardization and SOP protocols in place. So we got in touch with world's largest chains, which were based out of Australia and Europe. And we finally partnered with EV Spain, which at that time was also leader in the world. So EV Spain came as our technology partner. And after that, we got Goldman Sachs on board as our private equity investment. Leading investment was from Goldman, which gave us a lot of confidence on our model, on our progress, which was made in the first couple of years, and gave us definitely a ability to invest in quality and in infrastructure and standardization. So we took off from EV coming in and Goldman coming in. So there were basically 5 investors put together. It was also backed by one individual doctor from Bangalore as a promoter, along with the seed investor, Dr. Vinesh Ghadia. So we had good mix of venture capitalist and large private equity like Goldman Sachs.
So as Nova is growing and then eventually merges with EV in Spain and is financed by Goldman, what other groups are emerging? You said that 5 other chains came after. Who were they and when did they come about?
So I would just clarify that it was never a merger with EV. EV was our technology partner. We had a royalty agreement with them and a sweat equity divested to them for whatever they were helping us, and they were a very valuable partner for our quality improvement. Indira IVF, currently India's largest IVF chain, one of the largest in the world. They have more than 100 plus clinics across the country, and they have done some very I would say phenomenal execution of plan in Tier 2, Tier 3 city largely. Was next. They started their journey from a very small town in India, in Udaipur, which is in upper western region. And after Nova's initial success, Indira started expanding well. There was another healthcare group, which was Manipal Health, which is again today also is number 1, number 2 healthcare group in India. They forayed into IVF with a chain called Ankur Manipal. There was another onco player in India backed by private equity. Their company name is Healthcare Global, HCG. They forayed into IVF chain called HCG Milan. The biggest healthcare group in India is Apollo. Apollo forayed into IVF chain called Apollo Fertility. At present, as we speak, in last 3 years, in spite of COVID time, there are 4 or 5 new chains which are launched in India, and they all are expanding robust and doing investment of millions of dollars. In North, there is a new chain which has come up with 16 clinics in last 2 years, CK Birla. There is a chain in southern region called 49, do have 7 clinics. There is a chain in southernmost state in India and Kerala, ARMC. There is, you name it, and in India you will find a mid-level chain, national chains, and it just took off. And as I said, in 2016-17, 16% of clinics were organized, part of organized chain, but 30% of IVF cycles were done in the organized chain. 16% clinic, 3% in ownership, 30% in cycles. At present, as we speak, 35 to 40% of India's IVF cycle are part of organized chain, and the rest 60% is still fragmented, unorganized. So starting from 0 to 40, it only took 1 decade.
What do you think is going to happen in the next decade? And perhaps before I ask that, you may have answered my question about consolidation, but maybe not. So 60% of the market is still being done by those clinics not within a network. In the US and Canada, networks are running out of clinics to buy. And it's not because they've consolidated all of the clinics. There's still plenty of independent clinics, but there aren't so many 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. doctor clinics left in the US and Canada that are independently owned. Is that problem on the horizon yet in India, or do we have a long way to go before we run into the problem of not having enough sizable clinics to buy?
Very interesting question, Griffin. Again, some demographic detail. Today, across the world, we talk about India being the growth engine of world economy. IVF is also very similar or even better. India has highest young population in the world. As of 2010, we had 247 million couples in reproductive age. As of 2010. Can you imagine in 2020 or expected, we still have to do our population census, which we do once in 10 years. Because of COVID, this time it was delayed. In 2020, 10 years later, expected couples in reproductive age is 434 million. From 247 to 434 million. It's a huge demographic shift. Even if you consider same infertile patient, which was recorded and published by Indian government in 2010, acknowledged by EY report in 2015, which is 9% infertility. It has increased infertility in India, but even if you consider same, from 30 million infertile couple in 2010, we are now 52 million. 52 million infertile couple. So we have a huge demographic dividend, highest young population in the world, one of the highest urge of parenthood in the world, which is not there in most developed countries. In India, I would say 9.9 out of 10 people in their young age will get married, and 9 out of 10 people will opt for becoming parent. It's a societal, cultural strength in India that we have very high urge of parenthood. Now, highest young population, highest urge of parenthood, but ever-changing lifestyle. There is a published study in fertility study, which it's an Indo-Spanish study done by Nova EV. Indian woman peaks fertility potential at the age of 25, whereas an Caucasian woman peaks fertility potential at the age of 31. There is an inherent genetical difference of 6 years. Why culturally we used to marry early is because of this. Now, while we try and copy Western lifestyle, our genes don't change. This brings very high burden of infertility in India because we are now marrying late in India, copying Western lifestyle, but our genes remain the same. This all put together, even if we have 2,000 plus IVF clinics now, we do 250,000 cycles in India now, which is number 2, number 3 in the world. We are still under 10% of the real potential. So for us, the market which looks very big, but we are just taking off. Answer to your question, our cruising altitude or saturation is 10, 15, 20 years away. So current growth in IVF business is launching new clinics, launching new chain every week. We add 60 to 70 IVF clinics every year, which is 1 clinic a week. So consolidation in India has, I would say, just from where I am seeing it, is just beginning. So we have thousands of clinics in India to buy. Shortage of IVF clinics to consolidate or IVF chains to get consolidated, that shortage is 10 years away, at least 10 years away. Because we have a long runway in front of us still.
Is it more common to consolidate clinics, or is it more common to start a clinic de novo? If we're one of these 6 or 7 chains, are we more likely, in the course of a year, are we buying more independently owned clinics and bringing them into our group, or are we creating more clinics de novo?
So all the chains today, including Nova, Indira, Birla, Apollo, 49, ARMC, you name all the chains. I would have missed a couple of names. I'm sorry about that.
I do too. I always miss a couple names, Vinesh, and I know that a couple people will curse me, and maybe your contemporaries will curse you for leaving them out too, but welcome to the club.
So all of them today are launching new clinics, organic, because that's enough market for everybody still to be tapped. I'll give you one very small, not insight example. So I am at present working on an IVF platform story, where I am in discussion with 4 or 5 mid-level organized chain to acquire them for the platform. And my strategy is to buy and build. Buy 4 or 5 chain, that is 35-40 clinics, and build maybe 35-40 clinics in next 7-8 years, and have an exit in sight in 2030 or 2032. 7-8 years to 10 years of business plan. I think even Nova has started looking at some assets which they want to add to their portfolio. So is Indira and other chains. This has just begun in last, I would say, since 2022. Largely because now there is an ARD regulation in place. So government has passed ARD Regulation Act. And because regulation is in force, many single doctor-owned clinics believe that it is better to be part of organized network where there is a bandwidth, there is management bandwidth, there is professional handling of all the departments, including quality departments and audit departments. So that when there is a regulation in place, there is better bandwidth to handle the larger business. Also, it's just last 1 or 2 years, most senior doctors or many successful IVF clinics led by doctors have realized that organized chains are growing much faster compared to single doctor-owned clinic because of the management bandwidth and because of capability of investment. So they also started believing that joining hands with an organized chain, current chain, is basically a good idea, and it's win-win partnership for both. So the word consolidation just started. Shortage 10 years away.
I'm catching my breath because this is a order of magnitude that we haven't totally seen. And when I'm seeing my colleagues' LinkedIn posts of them visiting India, and I'm seeing this more than I've ever seen it before, partly because no one could travel for 2 years, but also partly because something's clearly happening in the country. And you're starting to give numbers to that story of what's happening there. How are you getting doctors? In the US and Canada, people are consolidating, but then they're running into challenges staffing them with REIs. I talked with Dr. Bishwanath Ghosh in that episode that the REI fellowship doesn't exist in the same way in India that it does in the US. But how are you finding enough physicians to be able to staff these programs?
So Griffin, again, anything you ask to me, I feel it's very interesting, possibly because I love to speak about IVF business in India. My first designation in an organized chain, Nova IVF, was Director Doctor Empanelment. Because it was the same question. My private equity investor or my board believed that finding right doctor will be difficult. Recently, I was working with Art Fertility Clinics, again a Middle East-based, very high-quality IVF chain, again backed by a private equity, Gulf Capital. When I was interacting with the board before joining, presenting my business plan, the only question was asked to me by the management team of Gulf Capital is that from where will you find doctors? So all questions are similar. My answer is very, very simple. In India, we have 40,000 gynecologists. 40,000. Highest number of medical consultants across the world. We are blessed with talent in our country. Out of these 40,000 gynecologists, 10,000 gynecologists actively practice infertility. And all of them aspire to become IVF specialists. In India, we have plenty of organized chains who are doing fellowship course starting from 3 months to 6 months to 1 year to 2 years. Some very good fellowship course which are led by Milan, Dr. Kamini Rao, led by Dr. Mohammad Ashraf Kraft. Very, very good fellowship course led by EV along with Dr. Banker in Nova. Fellowship courses are done in small chains, mid-level chains, even in 49, even in Oasis. Now, to train a gynecologist who is already doing good level of surgery in cesarean sections and large endoscopic surgery on skills for own pickup is, if you ask me, I don't know if doctors will like listening this, it's not difficult. It's a 3-month training. A gynecologist who is already practicing infertility can be trained to become IVF specialist. We have plenty of 1-year courses in India. So there will be no challenge, and I'm repeating, no challenge in finding good IVF specialist, skilled IVF specialist. Absolute no. The challenge will be in finding right embryologist. We never had any university in India who offers embryology. Nobody in India understood the potential of requirement of embryologists which will come. Manipal, the healthcare group which I referred before, started IVF chain, is one of the most reputed medical university. They started embryology course 7, 8, maybe 9 years before, but they were giving 6 embryologists a year. Now I think they are giving some 20 or 30. Now in India there are 6 or 7 universities who have MSc in clinical embryology, but it is still skill shortage in India. Severe skill shortage is embryologists, not doctors.
What can be done to solve that embryology shortage? Can the same solution that was done with the chains themselves starting these 3-month to 2-year training fellowships, can the same clinic networks also create the infrastructure for embryology training? Because if you're creating at least one fertility clinic a week in the country, and it sounds like with 6 or 7 embryology programs at the university and maybe a couple others, that you're not on pace to fill that clinic growth with embryologists staffing the labs behind them. Can the clinic networks offer the same training that they did to cover the doctor solution?
In 2013-14, we when we were on the journey of a very robust growth in Nova, we realized this challenge, that we cannot depend on acquiring embryologists from market. First thing we did was we joined hand with the first university, and we used to offer internship course to all the students of Manipal who were passing out MSc in embryology, and we used to have the first look at them and pick up the best talent from them. But that also not enough. We along with EV co-curated a 180-day course for a master's in life science student, which you can find in plenty in India. And we had 180 days of logbook training program, co-curated, supervised by embryologists from EV. So we created our own bench strength, and we never faced shortage because of these two things. Joined hands with universities and took all of them as our intern and absorbed most of them as trainee in our clinics. And out of our say we had 19 clinics when we divested to TPG. 9-10 large clinic can have 2 embryologists anytime, which can be trained in our logbook training program supervised by EV. So we created our own bench strength. Indira actually cracked it even better. They have a complete training school in their headquarters for doctor and embryologists. And they have a crash course of 3 months. Any Masters in Science student can be trained under simulators, excellent training ecosystem, very documented, and they churn out their own embryologists and own doctors, IVF specialists. So 2 large chains, Nova and Indira, cracked it very well. The way forward is either all the chain have one clinic as their training hub, take science students in India which are available in plenty, and create a training ecosystem. Second is, I have this dream in my mind that we should have a school of embryology in India, having 50, 100 students every year coming from science, masters in science, and we have best of the minds in the world who can be brought in as faculty, and we can develop a very robust training ecosystem in India. We have students from Oxford University in India, many from Oxford, doing MSc embryology there. We have students from Monash University in India, from Nottingham, from ICL, from UCL, you name reputed universities offering MSc in embryology. We have students in India from there who are practicing embryology. So it's high time that in India we create more infrastructure for embryology training program, which is very doable.
I would say it's high time as well, because there could be another vulnerability that there's already an embryologist shortages in India. But what if some richer countries, namely the United States, figure out their visa mess that they have been struggling with the last few years? What if they figure it out and say, okay, we are going to start taking this seriously and get some more skilled people from the sciences with embryology being a focus? Then you would certainly want to make sure that you had enough embryologists if something like that were to happen.
I think you are giving secret sauce for the US IVF industry. I was talking to one of my colleague in IVF business in US about a month before, and I was saying that they keep saying me that we have a shortage of embryologists in US. And I said, if there is a special visa for embryologists in US, at least I know 100 people from India will apply. So I completely agree that if this happens, so there are many embryologists in India who go to UK and to Canada, but not in US because getting visa is not easy.
Are embryologists able to buy into the equity of clinic groups?
Wow. Again, interesting point, which has a strong belief system in India now. With more it becoming organized, with more shortage, the value of embryologists have increased in last 5 years, recently. Not to the extent of what that they can buy equity or they are offered ESOPs in India still. But I strongly believe that it's not very far that this will happen in India, because it was largely doctor-led, and now I think at least in organized ecosystem of IVF, the value of embryologists is well understood. Still not to the level of being equity partner.
How does the track look for young doctors? Are they buying in at the practice level, the local clinic level? Are they buying in at the network level? Are both happening, neither happening? What does it look like for young fertility docs?
A young gynecologist who is doing birthing practice does not have work-life balance. In India, it's a huge business and potential is very high because we deliver highest number of babies in the world. So I don't need to deep dive into the numbers. There is a current trend in India which is changing, that the young gynecologists who are passing out, they are the current generation, right? So they want work-life balance. So we have more and more doctors who want to be in IVF rather than going into birthing. And for them, if they want work-life balance, is a fixed time job, and there is a management ecosystem, well-trained operation staff, well-trained nurse, so that once they leave clinic, they don't have to keep bothering about anything. So the young talent who doesn't want to be in birthing practice but in IVF are more attracted towards organized chain, because you have better work-life balance there. And you can learn and you can grow in an organized chain. You can learn a lot of things there.
So younger docs might also not have the leverage or the focus, or there's other things to be offered that they're not totally focused on buying in yet. What about those that are medical directors? How are those folks building their career? So you have a number of of OBGYNs who are just simply happy not to be practicing obstetrics. They're happy to have office hours, maybe make some more and be part of the growth that's happening in their continued education as well as in the field. But then you're going to have some of those that are deeply entrepreneurial and they say, I want to start a network. I want to become this chief medical officer of this network. What do their career tracks look like?
So in an organized setup, there is a structure in place where if you are heading a clinic, so in clinic, the org structure is that there is IVF specialist and there is a medical director or the chief, the senior most doctor in the clinic. And there are large chains which are shaping up in India. So there are regional directors who look after 5-6 clinics. They also practice in one of the clinic and they look after as leader in 5-6 clinics, around 10 to 15 doctors. And then there is a national medical director. So there is a career path for doctor to grow, but at the same time, it's not very clear. It's not very visible for a doctor to, like any other employee, there is a very visible career path. For doctor, it's not very visible or not very easy to grow in the career. Most doctor in India, till recently, believe that increasing their practice and increasing their commercial take home is their growth. They never look at career growth of handling more clinics or being in leadership position. I would say in last 10 years, it has started evolving, but still it's not very established. So for a doctor, if they're doing 5 cycles, 10 cycles a month, it grows to 25 a month or it grows to 50 a month. So their professional growth is more work and they take home more money rather than growing up in the ladder. That aspiration not many doctors have in India.
I can hear a lot of American doctors groaning and saying, oh, don't worry, Vinesh, you're going to have to deal with this problem 10 years down the line when they want all of it. And the American doctors that grew up with the career path that you just talked about and worked really hard on it sometimes feel that some of the younger doctors now want to skip that path and move into where they are. So that'll be a barrel of monkeys that comes as part of the fruits of the labor of having a growing market. It's a good problem to have, I guess, because that means that the companies and the marketplace has gotten to a certain point. I want to ask you about other growth challenges, but we've spent a lot of time talking about the clinics. I really wanted to have that understanding. Tell us what's going on elsewhere in the fertility industry in India. We talked a lot about the networks coming up, how 10 years ago they had almost no share of the market. Today they have 40% of the market. There's a lot more growth. There's a clinic happening at least once a week with 60 or 70 a year. But what's happening on the industry side? Genetic testing, lab manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, artificial intelligence, other things that I'm not even thinking to ask you. What's happening on the industry side?
So India as a country is little late in adopting newer technologies. What has changed in last 5 years is adoption of witness systems by 2, 3, 4 chains in India, which is and also alarm systems. Genetic testing in India is a very interesting curve. It's going through a very interesting curve from nothing about 5-7 years before. Today, it's about 5% of the cycle, genetic testing. Now, very quickly, I would try to address this. As a patient, if you have four good quality embryo / blastocysts, and if you what is the dynamics in India? I'm not saying scientifically what is right or wrong. If I offer patient genetic testing, that out of these 4, which is the best embryo which I can transfer to you, so that your time to pregnancy is reduced, and we identify the best genetically the most normal embryo. Where a patient believes that if you transfer 2 out of 4, if I don't get pregnant, and in next cycle in frozen embryos transfer, you transfer the remaining 2. So what is the advantage of going through genetic testing, where I'm spending so much of money? So it's difficult in India because 95% patient pays out of pocket, and the cost of genetic testing. When we launched the first genetic testing company in India, which was EV company launched through Nova's legal entity, it was as good as one IVF cycle. So it was very difficult for a patient to spend for two IVF cycle for genetic testing. Rather, they will do more frozen embryo transfers. Now the genetic testing percentage is going up. The price of PGTA is going down. Once this price of PGTA will match to the frozen embryo transfer price, which is very close now, this will suddenly flip. It's a tipping point. From the current 5-7% of cycles undergoing PGTA, it will go up to 25% by in next 5 years, is what I believe. Now there are 10 companies who are offering genetic testing. There are good PGTA models available in India, and the pricing is going down as the number of testing is going up. We are still about a year or two away from the tipping point, is what I believe. I keep advising to some large global companies that this is a great business opportunity in India. If you can burn money for 1 or 2 years or not earn much for 1 or 2 years, this will scale. This is a business of scale. About artificial intelligence, 2 companies have launched in India. 2 chains have adopted as a trial method. One is embryonics, another is live CRISPR. I think it will grow. It will start growing well. Genetic testing, artificial intelligence, witness system, alarm system, standardized high quality lab protocol, I think, are now prevalent in most organized chain, but these are at very different levels. If I can speak, Art Fertility in India has only 6 clinics. It is based out of Middle East, backed by private equity, is at a very different level. If you see any Art Fertility clinic, you will not feel any difference between the clinic in New York, London, Tokyo or India. Indira and Nova are up to the notch of international standards. Other chains are following to that standard. So overall lab parameter, quality parameter or standardization, IT infrastructure is being growing very fast in India, but led primarily by organized chains.
What's causing the price of PGTA to drop?
It's basically sequential, no? If you are running more sample in one cycle, it will reduce the cost per sample. I'm not a genetic specialist, but I can, in business sense, I know. I was one of the member who had developed the strategy board for the first genetic company in India, which was EV's company. It was known Eviomics at that time. Now it is very popular, eGenomics worldwide. It's no more EV company now. So the more tests you do, your fixed cost remains the same and your consumable cost remains the same because it is cycle of sequencing. It will reduce the cost of testing for that provider. So you can offer less cost to the IVF service provider.
Are the networks doing deals with the genetics testing companies to be their either exclusive or the preferred group? And so when you talk about scale, is there a risk of not winning the scale game? Because I think of Invitae closing their fertility division and Semaphore closing their fertility division, and they talked about lack of insurance reimbursements in the United States. But another thing that people talk about is that they're losing the game of profitability with the MSOs, with the networks. The networks are negotiating deals that are ultimately not profitable for most, and so they have to lose money, as you said, for some time, but maybe they can't do that. Maybe it could have been the case that Invitae couldn't do that Semaphore couldn't do that. So is it a dangerous game to try to win? And I'm not just picking on PGT companies here, but really anybody that thinks about scaling in this way and thinks about having to lose money for a little time, that's always a risk. Is that risk greater in India, that you don't actually win and you just lose money and go out?
So you take example of numbers, 250,000 cycles growing at 17-18% CAGR. We will be about 500,000 cycle in next 5 years. expected to be million cycle by end of this decade. From current 5% of genetic testing PGTA, it can go up to 20-25%, which is largely still less compared to Japan or US or most developed country. The scale is phenomenal in front of any genetic company. Now, when Eviomics was launched in India, when it was an EV company, not invested by private equity, after that it was some private equity, now it is Vitrolife company. It broke even company level and second year. Most genetic company in India, new companies are also making money even today. So at 20% more cost per genetic testing compared to a frozen embryo transfer in India, 20-25% more, most genetic companies are making money. What I'm trying to say is that if they bring down the cost and allow the market penetration to go up, and it crosses a tipping point of equivalent cost to frozen embryo transfer, this will boom. It will go up phenomenally. The company which can do this is Cooper Fertility. They are a global company. They have about close to $1 billion revenue now, highly profitable. They have still not launched their PGTI model, which they have launched in Europe and US, in India. And I keeps requesting them that if they can bring it X price and still either make very less money or no money, if not burn, this can and tap into large groups who will ready to pledge X number of testing. It's a good model, I think.
Cooper's not in the business of losing money, so it seems like they may not have figured it out yet. And I wonder, is there a different model that these companies can do? So you talked about the scale, which is enormous and unprecedented any place else in the world. You talked about 243 million people of reproductive age, I believe it was, over 50 million people who need assisted reproductive technology. 9 out of 10 of the young people are going to want to have children even as their maternal age advances. So the scale is there. Does the pricing model need to have these networks in place in order to be able to put forth a model that works for them too? Like if we sell 100,000 X, then the price is A. If we sell if we sell 1 million X, then the price is B. If we sell 10 million, then the price is C. Is there a gradient model that they need to be able to work on in order to be successful? And do they need the networks to be able to do that?
I think what you are saying is very right. But just take an example. Today, one of the chain which say, for an example, I am leading a chain which is doing 5,000 cycles, IVF cycles, and we are doing genetic testing of 2 or 3% of patient at X price. I can go to a genetic service provider that at Y price, this 2-3% I can pledge 10%. And there are 5 chains who can come together on the table and pledge all put together a huge number of genetic testing in 1 year, which is more than the total country which is doing. A service provider, a global service provider, it's a very good business model. It will help industry to do more testing. It will reduce time to pregnancy. It will reduce recurrent abortion. It will improve results. And it will help industry in both the ways. And then I think there is no return. It's a path which will then go robust towards growth.
Vinesh, you've been a wealth of information during this conversation. You walked us through some of the history of consolidation in India, the formation of networks, the early days with private equity, the training of fertility doctors, and somewhat and soon to be more so embryologists, the expanse of the demographics, the expanse of growth from clinics. You talked to us about the scaling potential that industry side companies have, PGT just being one of those examples. How would you like to conclude with our audience? It's mostly US based, but it's increasingly global, increasingly from India as well. How would you like to conclude about your prospects for the future of the marketplace?
So, Griffin, I very strongly believe, and I think everybody in the world, that to have a great business, What is required is right market condition, right capital, right people, right? I don't think timing can be better than this in India. With highest young population, one of the highest urge of parenthood, changing lifestyle, and increasing infertile patient in millions, all want to become parent. Timing is right. There is no shortage of global capital investment in India in sunshine sector like healthcare and IVF. We have enough talent in India accepting embryologists. I mean, at 250,000 cycle, number 2, number 3 in the world, in India is on firm track to become fertility treatment capital in next 2 to 3 years.
I hope we get to have you back on a couple times during those 10 years. Vinesh Ghadia, thank you so much for coming on the Inside Reproductive Health podcast.
You've been listening to the Inside Reproductive Health podcast with Griffin Jones. If you are ready to take action to make sure that your practice thrives beyond the revolutionary changes that are happening in our field and in society, visit fertilitybridge.com to begin the first piece of the fertility marketing system, the goal and competitive diagnostic. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.